All right. Hey, everybody. My name's Leah Callan Butler, and I'm going to moderate our session today with Nouns Esports. We're going to be discussing gaming DAOs as a new coordination layer. For those of you that haven't met me, my company's called Emphasis, but I also write a regular opinion column for CoinDesk and sit on the board of the Blockchain Game Alliance. Maybe you guys can just quickly introduce yourselves as well before we kick off.
Sure, I'll go first. Hi, my name is Peter Dager. I used to be a professional Dota 2 player for like 10 years, and now I'm helping build out Nouns Esports.
I'm Sasquatch. In another life, I was a StarCraft 2 player, and I'm the founder of Nouns Esports.
And I'm Pat Yu. I'm the head of strategy for Nouns Esports, and previously I was a professional gamer also.
Awesome, thanks. Very succinct, well done. So I thought we could kick off. For anyone here who isn't familiar with the traditional esports world, maybe you could give us a bit of a lay of the land. You know, what are some of the problems in traditional esports, and how did you find your way into the Web3 space? I'm guessing looking to solve some of those problems. So maybe, Peter, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure, so esports is a culture product that's formed around an appetite to figure out who's the best at a particular game. So you'll have some of your best esport titles are from these games that have been around for decades at this point, and that audience is so passionate about it, they want to figure out who's the best, and an audience forms around that. Let's see, what are some of the problems? It's hard to monetize a digital product to build out an ecosystem around that culture. A lot of it is very publisher owned. If you compare it to professional sports, like nobody owns basketball or football, but somebody does own Dota or Counter-Strike, which makes it a very complicated relationship to interact and find an equitable middle ground with the publishers. I got into crypto in 2022 by discovering Nouns Esports, and I saw all these little different NFT collections and groups where you had these communities forming around their love for art, essentially, and I compared that to an esports team, and it felt very, very similar, and these esports teams have really struggled to create organic fans of their organizations. Many of the fans of esports, they really just follow the players. When a player goes from Team A to Team B, Team A loses 99% of those fans, whereas in an NFT collection, somebody might sell or leave the community, but the rest of the community doesn't follow. They're connected to the love of the art and the community, and I do think that esport teams need a little bit more of that. So I started figuring out how can we get these people to feel better connected to an organization, and I don't think that the Web2 esport teams have moved very far forward down that path.
Did you guys want to add anything to that in terms of problems with traditional esports?
I think one common theme that every team owner org knows is that the average spending for an esports fan compared to a traditional sports fan is significantly lower. So if you think about a traditional sports fan, they're buying tickets to the stadium, they're buying merchandise every year, they're buying lots of products around their favorite team, whereas esports teams, that level of spending is significantly lower. And that's always been a problem that's needed to be solved in esports.
I also think that one big thing to understand is that in 2015 we received a lot of institutional investment that caused us to spike to 10 to 12x valuations, a similar way to a software company. But we didn't have the revenues at the time to actually be at those software company valuations. My own background from coming into Web3 and learning about how to do esports better actually comes from the ETHDenver community. A little known fact is that most of the people who run ETHDenver actually come out of DreamHack, which was one of the largest digital festivals in the gaming industry. And so when you're at ETHDenver, you actually see a lot of the kind of benefits that we had during DreamHack's inception, all the way through it becoming the largest digital festival. And we try to keep that same ethos when we're at this event, and we're hoping to move that into the esports industry through Nouns Esports.
It does have DreamHack vibes here, actually, totally. We were actually just talking about that last night, especially in that room across the hall with the giant squids.
Yeah, exactly, very Burning Man-esque.
Yeah.
All right, so I think just before we dive a little bit further into the esports side, DAOs have certainly had their own challenges. Maybe you could explain a little bit about, what are the problems that you've seen with DAOs, and how is Nouns Esports actually looking to address or overcome some of those issues? Do you want to take that one, Pat?
I've been in Nouns since the start, so I think I have a unique perspective on DAOs at this point. I do think like Nouns is kind of an outlier in the sense that every DAO is different. There's a lot of different bylaws. Some are based on ERC20s, some are based on NFTs, which is kind of like what Nouns primarily innovated. I think one problem with DAOs is people assume that everyone is contributing in a DAO because there's so many members, and members have that agency to be a member of governance. But ultimately, a lot of responsibility falls on the shoulders of only a few people, and it's kind of people who step up to the plate and maybe don't even have like a delegated responsibility, but they just see that something needs to be done. And yeah, there's always just that question of leadership, or if you're working with a partner, who does that partner reach out to in the DAO community, because there's not that figurehead. And so just kind of scaling a DAO and growing its core builder group has always just been an interesting dynamic that has difficulty playing out across different DAOs.
I think that I'll give two examples. I think I could talk all day about how DAOs could be better, but I think one of the ones that are that's really interesting to think about is actually voter atrophy. You can do a lot of marketing and get a lot of early members into a DAO, but what happens is this concept of voter atrophy. When you don't support your DAO members or your contributors and they don't feel like their voices are being heard, a lot of times they actually feel like they don't want to be active in the DAO. And so when you look at governance tokens, you could have a large portion of people who aren't actually voting, who aren't actually contributing, but they actually are part of the total token supply. At the same time, we also have issues, maybe not so much at Nouns Esports specifically, but we do have an issue kind of widespread across all DAOs of high donor bias. When you add a financial aspect to DAOs, but you don't actually look at the solutions of how to include maybe non-financial contributors, you end up with the concept of high donor bias, where maybe 1 or 2 or 3 whales might control 60% of the vote, and so everybody else may be an active contributor, but it doesn't really matter in the end when voting occurs.
Yeah, and that actually starts to turn away people from the DAO, because they actually, if you're like a new prospect who maybe wants to join, but then you learn that the voting dichotomy really comes down to like 1 or 2 voting blocks, that's very disheartening, because you want to have impact with your vote. So I've definitely seen that play out across DAOs, where whales kind of just ultimately kill traction towards the DAO because that governance element is kind of stripped away.
Yeah, so can you just spell it out for me? What are some of those differences between, if you're an esports team managed by a community DAO versus an esports team managed by a corporate entity? I can imagine it must be worlds apart in terms of how they work, but could you lay out some of those differences?
Yeah, I think, when I started Nouns Esports, I had to go to the DAO and convince them that spending money on playing or paying players to play video games was like a cool thing. And the biggest appeal, honestly, was that we could immediately have in-game branding in some of the most popular games just by having really competitive teams. But there's just a big social coordination effort that needs to be undertaken to say, hey, we'd like to do an esports team at the DAO. This is why it makes sense. It endears people to the brand. We can bring more partners into the ecosystem. We create new fans of the DAO. But it is more social coordination, and ultimately, there's the leadership of the esports project, but then there's there's people in the DAO who are large voters, and you should always be having a dialogue with these people, kind of similar to a sponsor. A traditional sponsor, I would say. Another big key difference, I'd say, is just the transparency element. So the DAO is on chain. Nothing's hidden on chain. You see the transactions. You can learn exactly how much people are paid if you want to go and go through Etherscan and figure it out. So ultimately our player salaries are public. We're comfortable sharing all that information, but we leave it to the player discretion, just because that salary discussion or terms or whatever is always kind of a sensitive thing. But yeah, we're just super pro transparency, because that comes from the culture instilled by the blockchain technology.
Yeah, and I would say esports has been very shrouded in that sense. There's a ton of investment capital being pumped into the space, and I don't think that fans have enough trust, a trusting relationship with the organizations, and I think that almost deters them from their willingness to spend like when you buy a jersey, you don't know how much of that is going towards supporting your favorite player versus how much is just, going to the C-suite. And the internet and esports is this new phenomenon where people are capable of having these incredibly close relationships with people online, and yeah, it's different than professional sports, which a lot of people try to compare it to.
So like all of our fundraising is done through on-chain proposals that get voted on, and that is just so fundamentally different from traditional esports where a sponsor might come in, but you have as a fan you have no idea what those terms are. Whereas with our proposals, we just publicly share them because they're being voted on a website anyway. Anyone can access them. So it's nice to be able to own it and say, hey, we're asking for $2 million for this next year to run these premier esports teams, and fans just appreciate that. It's a breath of fresh air to be able to actually get into the nitty gritty of what kind of support their favorite players or teams are getting.
And I think one of the areas that's really important to understand for Nouns Esports is that we're grant funded, right? When you go and look at some of the traditional esports organizations, they've given up chunks of their equity, which means that they have investors, they have boards of directors. We also have we have a board of directors pretty much, which is a multi-sig, people who actually get to choose on signing off on larger spends. But when you give up 20% of your company in a seed round, you give up another 20% in an A round, and you haven't really figured out that product market fit, you're really kind of shifting into KPIs that are more vanity metrics. In the last cycle for esports, we noticed that eyeballs were most important, total view count, total following count. Kind of what you see in the similar fact of what you see in GameFi today is that people really want to see transactions, they want to see total amounts of following on a Twitter account, and they want to see nothing that has to do with retention. And so I think what GameFi is happening right now is actually the same issue that esports did back in 2015, is that we've looked at the wrong KPIs. The cool thing about Nouns Esports is that because we're grant funded and we're supported for $2.1 million, we actually have a large enough budget to really play around with software development and looking at longer term mechanisms that actually help support not only the contributors in our organization, but also help with actually bringing in more contributors and helping scale with that through technology.
I just want to come back to something that you were just talking about, Gage, which was just around community governance. Because I feel like in Web3, we often celebrate this idea of community governance, but it's also sometimes incredibly difficult to do. it's not a walk in the park. So I was wondering, what are some of the challenges that you've had with trying to coordinate and engage such a big community?
Yeah, community governance is an interesting topic for sure, and ultimately, we're not at the stage yet where we're just letting the entire community vote on, what premier esports teams we're going to pick. We still have that kind of core leadership of people with expertise in esports, but we do want to just continue to integrate more and more elements of community governance. Probably the best example of that right now within Nouns Esports is the utilization of Prophouse. And Prophouse is essentially a way for people to apply for funding for a certain type of theme. And in the case of esports, we provide travel sponsorships to up-and-coming players. And so, we'll put up a travel sponsorship for a tournament. Any player can apply who plays that game, and then the community gets to vote on who ultimately wins that travel grant. And we really like this because, first of all, it's not us deciding every single decision in Nouns Esports. The community actually gets to say, hey, this is the player that our community should back. And when they go and do well, the community is just even more excited about it because ultimately they're the ones who chose that player and decided, hey, this is who's representing us. So when they get that podium placement finish or a high placement finish, it's really it's much more exciting than just like a traditional model of a team participating. And I think going forward, we just want to find ways to continue that relationship where the community is making more and more decisions. Maybe one day it gets to a full DAO element, but at the moment we still need to keep that balance of leveraging our expertise. Peter here, he's been playing Dota for over a decade. We have a Dota team. It's good to rely on people with that insider knowledge of how the industry works, and there's a balance there.
And I'll just add, because we were talking about fans, or I was talking earlier about fans only following certain players within certain games. A lot of people, they just have one game that they love and focus on, and it's hard to, if your organization decides to leave that game and go elsewhere for a multitude of reasons, you might lose that fan forever. So when we're doing stuff like Prophouse, where we're enabling people to participate almost in the management of an esports organization, we're attracting a different type of fan who likes that governance model. So as we go from game to game to game, yeah, there might be a game they like more than others, but they're sort of in love with the process of being a part of the organization, not necessarily just following their favorite players. And that's how we want to, we want to create lifetime fans of our organization, not just, and we want to play both sides, right? Like we want to have people who follow Nouns Esports because we signed their favorite player in their favorite game, but we also want to show them that, hey, you're obviously an esports fan. Have you ever thought about playing a more active role on an esports team? Hey, we're Nouns Esports. We enable that.
Yeah, and I want to give an example, kind of like going back to the ETHDenver community. When you come to ETHDenver, you're obviously here for the hackathon. You might want to build, you might want to look to get funded, but you also might get interested in public goods, and you might want to do some social impact. You might want to do some art and actually enjoy some of the DJ music that we have, or do some offsites and actually host an event. In that same kind of concept of example, we have gamers in 2024 being much more multifaceted. 15 years ago, we were hardcore gamers and we were only interested in being the best. We cared about eyeballs and we cared about selling merchandise, but right now, when you look at Nouns Esports, not only are we gamers, we are in the Discord server every day actually doing community games, we're also building a business and providing opportunities for people who are interested in esports actually to jumpstart their career. At the same time, we also pull sponsorships, and we're also building technology. So if you're a software engineer and you want to build some technology with us, it's very simple to just hop into a contributor call. And so I think it's really an evolution of what the gamer profile is. We've gone from kind of what 10 years ago was the stereotype of basement-dwelling nerds into people who want to do social impact, people who might want to do software engineering, who want to build businesses on top of it. And it's been really interesting to actually see all those different types of people come into our community purely for their passion for games.
Yeah, I just got a follow-up question on that, because I thought it was so interesting how you were saying that you found this opportunity to uncover a completely different market segment that might not have had an interest in esports before, or at least it wasn't being fully leveraged. What does the community look like now? Because it sounds like it's incredibly expansive. You've got everything from fans and up-and-coming players to probably KOLs and content creators and software developers. Like, what does it look like, and what's your approach to community building in terms of further expanding that ecosystem?
Sure, Gage touched on it a little bit, but right now we're really focused on Prophouse, and the best way for us to do this at the moment is through the fighting game community with individual player travel sponsorships. So we actually have a round that's voting right now and another round that's available for proposers. And you can also go to our website and apply to join a voter. And essentially, you submit your wallet address, you tell us a little bit about your background in esports, what games you love to play, and then we essentially whitelist and then airdrop an NFT to that user, which powers them to be a voter on Prophouse. So right now, this year, in the past years, we've just been very focused on growing our awareness, mostly within Web2 audiences, getting up there and sharing space with the biggest teams in the world. But this year, we've got a little bit more focus on building our on-chain audience, helping people create their crypto wallets for the first time, and then giving them the tokens that allow them to interact within our community.
So you're really onboarding a lot of noobs as well to
Yes,
Web3.
we do lots of onboarding, and there's a couple cheat codes with like prize money and competing in events. Players, if you just tell them, oh, you got to create a wallet to participate in governance, that's not always super exciting for them. But if you tell them, hey, you've got 100 USDC waiting for you, just make your wallet and we'll send it to you, they generally figure it out.
That's one hell of an incentive. Yeah.
And then we can start giving them the tokens, and then hopefully they, people. I'll just say, like, before you own an NFT, you don't really understand how you can feel connected to like a JPEG or a digital piece of art. But then once you kind of go through it, experience, be a part of that community for a little bit, you sort of grow a little bit of a connection to that to that JPEG, and you're like, I don't really want to get rid of this thing.
It becomes really like sentimental. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think, in terms of onboarding, it's always felt very natural for me to leverage esports to onboard people into the Nouns community and, subsequently the greater Ethereum community, because ultimately the culture of Nouns has just been so endearing and positive. And when you look at actually what Nouns funds, and there's just so many public goods or schools in Uganda, things like schools in Uganda, renovating a skate park, naming a new species of toad by donating to scientists. Like, there's just a lot of amazing things that you can't really be mad about when you think of like why people are traditionally mad about crypto coming from Web 2. It's usually the speculative element that really kind of upsets them. They're like, why would I buy some like weird dog token or some poo-poo coin or whatever? And we're not talking about any of that. We're talking about doing cool shit in esports, and we're talking about all the other cool stuff that Nouns does. And none of that is like profit seeking. It's just like, let's do good things and have positive impact in the world. And it's hard to argue with that and say like, oh, this is some terrible crypto thing. So it's kind of like a superpower to be affiliated with Nouns and to leverage that backbone while onboarding people.
Yeah, so just a follow-up question to that, because I think in our chats before this actual, on-stage discussion as well, I've heard from you guys a lot that making sure that you get that across, that this is a non-speculative venture, is really important to you. But at the same time, too, you've still got to make money somehow, and it's got to be a profitable venture. And obviously, I think traditional esports has really struggled to monetize, as you were saying earlier. So how do you balance that push-pull in terms of we're not speculative, but we're still got to make a buck at the end of the day?
Yeah, thankfully, within the last really year or so, the friction to get on chain has significantly diminished. So, in the past where you would have to go through a central exchange and have your hot wallet set up and transfer coins and then use those coins to issue transactions, now there's things like Privy, which you can literally sign in with email or Discord or Farcaster and be plugged into a crypto app, or just using Farcaster itself. There's so many ways to experience on-chain activities without leaving the app, and so yeah, essentially with the really diminished friction these days, it's been much easier to onboard people, and I think that trend continues. In terms of monetization, again, there's products in crypto that can be created that are non-speculative. Minting things that are like a time and placement, not like buy this because number might go up. That's pretty cool. I think people like those kind of mementos, and you can see with the success of Zora and limited time, free mints, people go on chain to collect these kind of special moments that are related to their favorite things. We can also create greater fan experiences with on-chain products. So for example, participating in Prophouse being a member of governance compared to traditional esports teams, that's quite a privilege. No other team really offers that experience. So there's ways to, kind of create a financial model around getting involved in governance, getting a deeper enrichment in the community. There's traditional things we can pursue like partnerships, and there's plenty of crypto partners that we truly believe in and would want to work with, because again, they're doing good things in the space that aren't just strictly number go up kind of speculation. And those are the people, or those are the types of brands we want to help bring new users towards. So I think there's a very strong path forward of uniting Web3 and esports.
I wanted to add a little bit of a different side of it. Esports has been primarily funded by publishers wanting to extend the longevity of their game. They feel like esports is a marketing tool that allows that. So when they release a game, they wanted to have an esports program to incentivize players to, see a future for themselves, and that can, turn a game's shelf life from a 1-month hit to a 5 or 10 year, long game. And then they can essentially, sell microtransactions of cosmetics within the game throughout its entire life cycle. And that model has, was very much ingrained into launching a game in 2014 to 2022, or even today, some people are still doing it. I think what publishers realize that in these very, very popular games, that those microtransactions, cosmetics are kind of selling themselves just to the player base, and esports may or may not be really pushing the bar that much forward. So a lot of publishers have really pulled back on esports, and it's kind of created some challenges for the industry. So we need to, and this is pretty much what the fans are willing to spend money on, is digital items within the game. So what digital items can we create that esports fans are willing to spend money on? This is where I think we need to get them on chain and get them to recognize or to identify these tokens or NFTs as things that they care about, that they're, that they feel okay spending money on. because the publishers have they've pulled back quite a lot.
And I think that one of the most important things to think about when it comes to monetization of esports is that in the previous years, we've always looked at eyeballs, but we've never really looked at what is the spending power of an individual user. When you get users on chain, you're seeing their spending habits, you're figuring out what NFTs they hold. Are they whales? Are they low spenders? Are they on Arbitrum? Are they on Base? Are they actively using a wallet 2 times a week? This data is so useful for actually creating more specific profiles of of future customers, and that helps sponsors finally see where is that value from understanding the demographic profile of each esports team. I think that we're one of the first communities in esports that's actually taking data-centric community building very, very seriously, and the technology that we build on top of that is super important for it. I want to know if my users in Brazil have the money to be able to buy a $35 t-shirt, or if it's too expensive for them, maybe we drop it down to $25. It's so important to make sure that your future fans actually are able to afford the products that you sell, that your sponsors understand what demographics they're hitting, and through that type of data, we're actually able to attract a new range of sponsors that otherwise other teams haven't been able to tap into previously.
Just while we're on the topic of value, I wanted to touch on, you've got some amazing public goods initiatives that I saw that you've been doing. Would love for someone to mention the go-karts thing. I'm so in love with this thing. But on top of that, how do some of these initiatives actually deliver value back to the DAO, as opposed to just being some kind of feel-good, fluffy thing that looks nice? Just interested to know how you think about that.
Okay, so I'm not as crypto native as these guys, but one of the things that I love about the DAO or Nouns DAO, or really any token in particular, that the ethos of the token is really determined by its holders, especially when governance is enabled. So if Nouns DAO likes to fund athletes, artists, technology, and nonprofit stuff like the charities and so forth, that's something that they'll continue to vote and spend their money on. And then people, as those props get approved, people then begin to understand this is what Nouns DAO is about. If I buy a noun, I'll get to join this community of other people who also like supporting nonprofit activations.
Real value alignment in terms of what people want to feel a sense of belongingness with. Yeah. Can you explain the go-karts thing? Because it's so cool. I love it.
Yeah, so, just like Nouns, we do try to take a lot of the core values of the culture of Nouns and bring that to Nouns Esports, and that means, creating a lot of art, doing a lot of public good work, trying to make the space better. In particular, we're planning, we're trying to dabble, or not dabble, but we're trying to commit more to charitable efforts related to gaming, and there's a particular group called Gamers Outreach, which ultimately they make moving carts called go-karts, like Gamers Outreach carts, for children in hospitals, and the carts have their favorite console in it and a built-in monitor, and they're spec'd out with the right materials, so they're hospital grade. And that just felt like a very aligned charity to work with ultimately. And so in the future, when we're running some events, we're going to have a charitable component and hopefully raise money to produce a bunch of go-karts. I think they're about 3,500 each, so I can almost imagine a Twitch stream with a ticker going up to 3,500, and every time it goes up to 3,500, it's oh, another go-kart, yay, and that, I think that's a very motivating thing for the esports community. Just in general, I think we'll always be trying to align ourselves with benefiting the space. Another example I love to give is Liquipedia, which is, if you don't know, it's kind of the default wiki for esports. And ultimately, that was a community resource provided by Team Liquid. And it's something that everyone uses. It's branded as Liquipedia, so Team Liquid does get that kind of cultural kickback, but it's just a pure public good for the space. And I think that Nouns can do a lot of similar things, especially in software, but also just on raising money for a charity through events or initiatives from our players.
Did you want to add something to that, Pat?
Yeah, I'm one of the newest members of Nouns Esports, and I've been here for about 60 days, I would say now, as an active contributor. And so I think one of the coolest things for me is that I love gaming, but I'm also getting a little bit older, and I work actively in investments. But kind of through learning from Peter, learning through Gage, I was able to do a couple different projects myself, and I'm a multifaceted gamer, like I was saying earlier. We're building a Nouns shelter in China right now, which is giving us the first time access into talking with the Chinese government about on-chain communities. And in that specific project, we're doing mini shelters to help stray cats in Beijing, Shanghai, now in Changsha, and expanding over into Indonesia now. Also has helped us work with the Humane Society International, and that's something that only came out of the Nouns Esports community because they onboarded us in. At the same time, 2 weeks ago, we got into contact with the next Disney princess, Sarah Culbertson of Sierra Leone, who wanted to build water walls in Sierra Leone in the town of Pohnpei. When engaging with her, we realized that the biggest problem isn't actually providing capital into building water walls, but it's actually what happens in the years after that to maintain those water walls. It doesn't matter as much as putting a water wall down as it is to put the $2,000 to $3,000 in every single year to maintain those water walls so that they continuously have water supply. And these are things that are storylines that we really get to build within Nouns Esports, that we're helping not only bring larger people who have large media presences into the on-chain community, but then they also become attracted to Nouns Esports and gaming in general. In the future, everybody's going to be a gamer, whether you're playing on a mobile phone, you're playing on a computer, you're on your Vision Pro. I think that's one of the biggest beauties that we see in the Nouns Esports community.
Yeah, and you mentioned like what does kind of Nouns see from that? Well, of course, like if we're getting high placements on the podium, I think that does like inherently people will look into what Nouns is, and that kind of trickles back up to the DAO. We never tell our players like, hey, go tell your audience to buy a Nouns NFT. But at the end of the day, if somebody's a really hardcore fan of what one of our players is doing or what we're doing, they'll organically discover that themselves. And if they feel like a noun is right for them, maybe they'll join that broader DAO. But again, like we kind of take it like the Red Bull model, where we want to be at the place of doing really cool things and executing at a high level, but we're not at the end of the day asking our athletes or our community to go out there and tell people to buy these really expensive NFTs. Because most people can't afford it now, and that's probably going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I loved too when I started looking into it, just the commitment to social impact and how much that's a real core part of the community culture, and even the business strategy. I thought that was super interesting. But another thing that I found interesting, and this is, it's kind of stating the obvious, but I mean, you guys, all of your esports teams, you're all playing Web 2 games, and it's really focused on that kind of Web 3 governance and ownership. But most of the other Web 3 esports teams that I know, they're really kind of centering around Web 3 games. Some of them play Web 2 games as well, but they all play primarily Web 3 games. And the business model is very different because it's more about kind of acquiring assets or, earning Web 3 rewards. So I just thought maybe you could talk to that, like a little bit about the significance of being like a Web 2 esports focused group that is being managed in a Web 3 way.
I think we're all going to want to shoot a little bit of, fire some shots over into the gaming industry on this one. So I think all three of us have personal opinions. Everyone talks about GameFi, and I came in actually as a guild owner for a game called Axie Infinity, and I've kind of watched this space as not only an investor in the space, but also trying out almost every game in the space. And I have a hot take here, is that GameFi isn't actually GameFi right now, it's actually Fi Games. It's financial tokens that are masking themselves as games. And so my thing is that gamers like games. Like if the game is not fun, most gamers aren't going to care about the tokens, and we use marketing, we use speculation right now in GameFi to kind of showcase the profitability of what the token economy is. But instead, I think what we need to be doing is really thinking about retention. I say this over and over and over again, is that you can put $100 million into an industry, but if you get tens of users back 2 years from now, what have you actually done to make the gaming industry better? Instead, we should really be focusing on kind of inspiring a future generation of game developers who understand these new areas of the games development industry. Hyper-casual games that can convert using daily gamification mechanisms, and maybe let's do less about token raises of $20 tokens 4 years before a game comes out. I will say that the quality of games have gotten better during the bear market over the last 2 years, but 99% of games in GameFi, they suck. And that's the reality of what the gaming market is in Web3 right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty much aligned with that opinion. I think there hasn't been a AAA game in Web3 yet. Hopefully that's on the way. Some games do show some pretty great promise at the moment, but...
Care to name drop?
I like Parallel. I think Illuvium has promise. But yeah, ultimately, like, they're not there yet. And when I'm thinking about showing the Noggles, the Nouns brand, to as many people as possible, to as many viewers as possible, that's Dota, that's Counter-Strike, that's League of Legends, that's Valorant, that's Web2 games. And those audiences will show up in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of viewers, and that kind of exposure can't really be matched in Web3 gaming yet. I think I think if a AAA game takes off, it will be there. But I also agree with Pat's stance that it's 5 games at the moment, and if I've played plenty of Web3 games, and primarily I'm thinking about the token and like what gets the most return of the token, and like. Yeah, I'm treating it more like a way to make money than just having a casual, relaxing, fun game to play.
When airdrop.
And I'll add, like,
Yeah,
our product is, it's esports, and esports, I mentioned it before, but like esports is a product of a very, very passionate community who has an interest in understanding who's the best, or in like formal competition. So these games, they need to have tons of users to identify a small subset of those users who are actually interested in like a very competitive version of it, and then that justifies like an esports program. There's been so many people who have like spent millions of dollars trying to like launch their game with an esports program without really a demand for it, and it was just like a huge mistake. So I think we're interested in Web3 games more so this year than ever, but when we participate in them, it's going to be in like a very exploratory sense of, hey, maybe we're like beta testing or seeing if this, having some of our players try out the games and, see what they think, sort of a thing.
Well, I don't think that Axie Infinity is esports. I do want to go back into that because Axie Infinity and Sky Mavas were one of the market leaders in our last cycle. When Axie Infinity first came out, no one was really playing it, and then COVID happened. And then it became a mechanism for a lot of people who otherwise didn't have the capacity to make money to start becoming parts of guilds. And they were playing the game, they were farming tokens, and it became a storyline. That storyline brought in hundreds of thousands of users from across the world, and in a time millions of users across the world, right? And these people were able to play a game when otherwise they didn't have a job, and they were able to make, they were actually able to make money and make a full-time living off of that. That resulted in documentaries, that resulted in community gaming, and also kind of spurred that first generation of gaming projects in Web3. Every single game really needs to think about that as like, what is the storyline? What are the reasons why your players should be involved in your community other than making money? And I think that's the most important thing in this cycle is like, let's create a community of people who genuinely care about the publisher in the same way where whenever Blizzard releases a game or whenever Riot releases a game, I've been with them for 10 years and I'm willing to try their game and I want to support them because they really do care about making sure that the community is happy and that the games are actually fun.
They're giving me the buzz thing that we've only got 2 minutes to go, which is really disappointing because I feel like we could talk for hours on this. But last final question. I know that Nouns Esports is focused a lot on community ownership and governance at the moment. Is there any other kind of Web3 utility that you think that you might bring in the future? Anything on the roadmap?
I mean, I think one thing, it's kind of simple, but like, I think like digital signatures are already quite popular in games like Counter-Strike. People could actually, like, Valve inherently has like a centralized blockchain called Steam, and they sell their own NFTs, which are, CS cosmetics and stickers and stuff. And there are like autograph signatures that you can buy from your favorite players. If you think about things like NFC chips and like, IYK, which is like a company that's doing a lot of NFC integration. You could have like player jerseys where people can collect the digital signature from the NFC chip, and actually the players might appreciate that because they hate signing like 1,000 things. Like this is like the 100th thing you've signed the day your hand starts to hurt or whatever. So yeah, I think like there's just connecting the physical world with blockchain integrations. I think there's a lot of promise there.
I know we're almost out of time, so I'll just be really quickly. I think that with Nouns Esports, we're going to showcase some of the technologies that people outside of the industry don't even know about. Attestation services, ZK. There's a lot of really cool technology being built, and we're hoping to be like some of the first people who actually get to showcase that in a consumer-ready interface.
We want to track and understand like who's a valuable member of our community. So lots of like proof of attendance and
Love a POAP.
Yeah, exactly. Like, should you show up to one of our events? we want to be able to give you a token that memorializes that forever. And maybe we have a cool offer for you in the future. We'll be able to figure out who you are.
This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you guys. Really fantastic discussion. And I'm so looking forward to seeing where you go, because it really is such an innovative model that is quite unlike anything else in the space at the moment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.